Stardust.
Dear Stardust.
Dear Stardust.
Dear Stardust.
Dear Stardust.
Dear Stardust.
Traces by Dr. Phil Cummins, July 2025. Dear Stardust 2125. I am long gone. My words, though, survive, coming down through the years from Fitzroy, the bluestone cottage that brought me joy and a feeling of something like home. A letter, perhaps, more a poem about family and love and all the things in a life that rise and fall. My children's children are at the stage of their own farewells, a special age that affords them memories, a grace that flows at a much more serene pace than earlier days permitted, when young heads wrestled with complication and their doubts and the rush of the new. I trust they will have passed on to you as much as was needed to live well and do deeds both worthwhile and noble. I hope also that you have found your own way to leave a gorgeous mark for the Stardusts that will, in time, succeed you in our family line. They need you to dream of making things happen and to show them again and again how to give more often than you take, how to be true when much is at stake, how to shine when all around is grey, how to be sure when others are fey, how to laugh and sing and cook and bake, how to turn their fumbling hands to make beautiful things that are a delight for those who worry by day and night about all that is wrong and ugly. Remember that my three progeny carried on our line in their own bent, regardless of my too strong intent. They and your namesake made their choices, and they left behind for you traces of who they were, who we are, precious Stardust, our present continuous. They did what they thought was for the best. They were in equal measure both blessed and burdened by our joined up songline. The diagnosis may be benign or malignant. You must set your course and do what you can in turn to source the wit and the will and the wisdom to thrive in an orderly and random times. Forgive and then be forgiven. Teach what matters to your own children. Share knowledge of the world and beyond. Show how to earn a place to correspond with all through an open mind and heart. To learn both their skillful craft and art, and stand up for that which really counts for their souls, not just their bank accounts. Prepare them to keep a house that's warm and safe and kind and able to form them and their own as a fellowship bonded tight by enduring hardship and celebrating together those good times that roll around. For who knows? There will always be troubles of our own making that lurk in a dark hour. Who we become, us and you and me, and how we get there from who we be is how the gentle flame stays alight. We belong and grow, do good and right, for this is what we have always done and should always do, and have some fun, dear Stardust, for life's an adventure, and we can never be fully sure about what's around the next corner. You are enough to rise, to conquer your fears, to carry our hope forward in your smile and eyes and your words wherever you go, both near and far. All my love, your great, great, great grandpa.
Dr. Phil Cummins, thank you so much for your letter, and thank you so much for joining us on Dear Stardust.
Oh, Michael, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation to both contribute a letter and be here today. I'm so chuffed.
I just want to know, can you please introduce me to Stardust?
Stardust. Stardust in our family is my second son, Oliver, his fiancée, Anastasia. Our pet name, our nickname for her is Stardust, and that comes from my mother, who's 93 years old, Roma. Just won the Jean Arnott Award for contribution to the community, which is an amazing thing. But anyway, she named Stardust. And so in the letter that I've written, the poem that I've written in the form of a letter, this is Stardust 2125. So I'm assuming that this is Anastasia 100 years from now, not the current Anastasia, but Anastasia 3-4 generations hence.
It's beautiful. There's a sense of coziness and familiarity. The second we hear your voice in the letter, there's a sense of knowing that person in some way, shape, or form already with the way you write, with the way you speak. And you actually start by telling us all about your Bluestone Cottage there in Fitzroy. Can you tell us about where that place is?
Sure can. It's in Wurundjeri Woi country, the greatest suburb in the world of Fitzroy. I discovered Fitzroy when I was in my early 20s, and it just seemed like the best place in the world to me. This wonderful collision of life and history and music and art and food and people and everything. And when my marriage finished in 2008, I needed a place to live. And by 2011, one day, I just driving along looking for what I thought was an apartment, and I saw a for sale sign on this beautiful 1861 Bluestone cottage on Napier Street, and called up the agent, made an offer, and 15 minutes later the place was mine. So I've had it now for about 15 years, and it's the only place I've ever really felt like home. I speak to that in the letter. I spent most of my life trying to work out what home and belonging mean for me, but that's it now. It's a modest little place. We love it there. Yeah, it's the second half of my life, and it's a place that I can retreat to and I can go home to. It's full of art. It's full of lovely old furniture. It's full of light. Although the people out the back are just about to build a monstrosity out the back, which is going to block the light of our courtyard. But anyway, we'll see what the Civil Appeals Tribunal says about that.
I was in Melbourne 2 weeks ago, and as we were walking along, there's a sense of humility with a lot of the places that the houses and the people that are there, they absolutely adore them. They just, you can tell they've made absolute homes and places in those cottages. But from where I come from, it's, unless you're on 700 square, you don't have a generous space. But people make do with less. And as you said, it's a modest little place, but I would say you would call it a gorgeous little place from reading your letter as well.
Yeah, well, gorgeous is another word that my mum uses, so that's another family word. So that's much beloved. Yeah, it is. I think one of the challenges of living in our times is to learn about sufficiency. A little place is enough for me. You don't need, in my opinion, millions of rooms and masses of acres and all of those sorts of things. A little place is enough to make home. I'm more comfortable in a smaller space than I am in a larger space. I'm different from my father in that respect. My dad loved a big place and loved to spread out and turn multiple different rooms into his art making studios and things like that. But I'm very comfortable in a small space, and I think that if we're going to make cities work in our world, and particularly in Australia, and we're going to learn to make them affordable so that our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren, so that Stardust 2125 has our own place to live in. We're going to have to learn about what enough is.
When I watched you sort of present your letter, I looked at that space and thought that could be in a grand 100-room mansion, and it could also be in a 1-bedroom flat, because there's a homeliness to it and a coziness and a tightness to it that was really beautiful to see. Gorgeous to see, I think.
Well, thank you. We've worked very hard. The wall behind me where I was sitting in my chair is a 9.5 metre long bluestone wall that runs through the length of the cottage. It's remarkable to have that sort of ancient stone that probably was quarried within a kilometre of where the house is now, and there's art all over it. A lot of it is my father's, but there's sort of art that we've collected over the years. Yeah, I like being surrounded by beautiful things.
In your letter, you ask Stardust to remember to give more than they take. Do you remind yourself that, or is that something that you hold so dear and you know it so well that you just really want to share it with Stardust, or is there more to it there?
I think there are saints in the world who are in that latter category. I wouldn't put myself in that category. I think if there's anything good I do in the world, then I constantly need to remind myself to stay focused and to stay true on what I think the good is and to seek it out. What I have learned is that I'm happier when I give more than I take. And it's difficult to say that without sounding all pompous and braggadocious and all of those sorts of things, or doing the humble brag, the LinkedIn humble brag. I'm deeply honoured to be all of that sort of stuff. But the reality is life is much more fun when you can do something which might contribute towards somebody else's happiness. I think you're more likely to find your happiness in that. I'm 56 now. It's taken me a few years to learn what that means, but I'm very comfortable with that now. And what I would want for my children, we all want our children to be happy. It's one of the things that it's the curse of education, as a chalky and parents say to you. I just want my kid to be happy. But happy itself is a very fleeting thing. But happiness in a lifetime, I think, comes from helping others to find their happiness. And that's what I would hope that any in our family and any that follow and any listening might come to discover.
Sometimes I think there's almost a false humility that goes with that, because sometimes people give more than they take, which they're giving, but they're actually getting so much more from that giving. And you speak to a little bit there of giving that happiness to others is ultimately what provides you with that happiness. So, but there's a humility with the way that you're speaking to it, in that it'll be genuinely fulfilling. And you're not doing it for yourself, but you know what you're getting out of it still. Do you sometimes see that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're not getting something out of it, then you're not feeling.
Mm.
I mean, it's when Africans, particularly Southern Africans, talk about the notion of Ubuntu, that, and we of course use a technical word instead of a beautiful word. We talk about interdependence. There's an element of sort of the joining of hands, the clasping of fingers together. So if you think about, I'm thinking about a picture in my mind now, a photo of my father holding the hand of my little boy, James, who is now my big boy and the father of my grandson, Brian. And I look at the hands together, that's interdependence. And both of them perfectly happy in the moment. If you're not gaining something from it, then there's something wrong about that moment, and it's not right to be doing that. And I'm quite joyous about saying, this is the reward that I want. There's material rewards that we need as well too. I think that life goes a lot better when you've got a little bit of money in your pocket and you can pay the bills and you can put food on the table and take a bit of a holiday every now and then. Those sorts of things. Let's not kid ourselves that's the materiality is important. There isn't. We often present it as a binary in terms of money versus fulfillment. Well, you need both in your life. But then the fulfillment, you've got to get something out of the relationship. You've got to get something out of the giving yourself. Otherwise, what's the point? But the trick is to learn, and I think you learn this from the example of others. You really do. You watch people who are self-sacrificial and who do it in a gracious way, and you think to yourself, maybe I could do a bit of that. And you just keep trying, I guess. And you probably never quite aim up to the image that you've got in your mind, but that's okay too. That's the character piece. Character is always in the wrestling, the formation of characters in the wrestling. I think we had a chat about that last year. So you try your best. Try your best. That's what my mum would say. You got to try your best.
And one of your mum's words you said was gorgeous. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Gorgeous. She's a woman who is they're quite extravagant in her in her manner, and she has lots of big sort of costume jewelry and the older she gets, the smaller she gets as the osteoporosis and age takes over. So she's sort of shrinking a bit, but the colours get more vibrant and the language gets more extreme. And she'll be there in at dinner, and she'll say, "Oh, that was gorgeous," and then there'll be the chorus around the table, "Oh, gorgeous, 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 gorgeous." But then you catch my kids and their partners using that word themselves now. That's just part of their lingua franca. So yeah, all families have this detritus, don't we? We have these stories, but I think there's something particularly Australian about the way we take the mickey out of each other in the process. We don't take ourselves too seriously, and the fact that they love my mum so much is why they make fun of her, because otherwise, why would you bother?
Yeah, that is definitely something beautifully unique about sort of contemporary Australian culture, that maybe not super contemporary, but certainly if we go back maybe 20-ish years, that thought of taking the mickey, of loving someone enough to take the piss a bit is just gorgeous. Oh gosh, I said it.
Yeah, so you're doing it now too. Yeah, you watch. You'll catch yourself doing it over the next week. You will.
All right. I'm not a Cummins yet, but I'm just being introduced to the family vernacular. You ask Stardust to leave a gorgeous mark. I'd love it if you could let me know some places, some times that you've seen gorgeous marks left by people.
Mrs. Lemon, who was my primary school music teacher, left a gorgeous mark on a whole lot of little boys who probably would not have had the courage to stand up on stage and sing and act and do those sorts of things. But her sheer enthusiasm, her belief in herself and her belief in those little boys, in what I won't name the school that I went to, but it was an old-fashioned, highly competitive school where there was a lot of the Lord of the Flies sort of stuff amongst a whole lot of very, very bright little boys, and it was the sort of school where if you stood up on stage and you did something vulnerable, you were probably going to get smashed about it for the rest of your life. She made that irrelevant. So music became something that was off limits for derision, and as a result, there are 4 world-leading conductors who were some of the boys who stood on her stage and sang in public for the first time. So that's a gorgeous mark to leave, I think. I'm trying to think. I mean, there are lots of examples of people who I think left what I think was probably a gorgeous mark on my life as well too. So, I'll talk to you about a friend of mine right now who I worked with in several different capacities. He was chaplain at a school I was head of, and a colleague. He's now heading off to the UK with his wife, and he's heading into a fabulous role there. And his name's Marcus Edwards. And we were doing a late night chapel with the boarders. And he's an Anglican minister, and he sort of represents he can represent the broad church of Anglicanism. So he can do ministry in lots and lots of different ways. And on this occasion, he had some holy oil, which is it's quite high church thing. It's not very common to do that, but he felt a need to do that, and he was anointing boys with the sign of the cross as they wanted to, and inviting them to come up to do it. And we got to the end. I think I was in my Batman suit, I was in my cape and gown and all of that sort of thing, assisting him. And we got up to the end of the service, and we were putting things away, and he just turned around and he said, "Phil, turn around for a second." And he turned around, and then he anointed me as well too. And that was something that he didn't need to do. But, if you're a religious person, I've got a faith background, a faith base. There's a lovely line in the song Hallelujah about, the Holy Spirit moving in you. It moved in him at that moment, and he passed that on to me. That was a gorgeous mark. And sometimes when I'm at my lowest, I can feel his fingers just doing that on my forehead. There's 2 gorgeous marks.
And those gorgeous marks, in the first instance, it's a lifetime of confidence that's developed over time with your teacher. And in this
Yes.
second moment, it is literally a moment, but it's, again, a lifetime of impact, and it sits with you when it sits with you, and it even sits with you when you don't realize it is, I'm sure. I think quite often in education, we look for those bigger moments publicly, but for the most part, when people talk about their favorite teachers, their favorite this, their favorite that, the most impactful educators on their life, they'll come back to individual moments. And those are the ones that we feel the most. Is that where, is there a sense of character in that for you, or how does that relate to the work that you do?
I think there is. It's a lovely question, a really lovely question, Michael. I think there is. So if, two of the things that I've learned in what it is that we do as teachers, we teach who we are and we lead from the core of our being. And so if we think about that, and, I'll take you back to another moment, another gorgeous mark left on me. I had this wonderful executive assistant, school secretary, she would have been called in the old days, and that's what she probably would have preferred to be called, but she was an EA, and her name was Eva, and she caught me on a day where I was stressed and, perhaps not as attentive towards the people who were lined up outside my office to see. And at one point she sort of walked in and she closed the door and put her hands on her hips, and she said, "Look, you need to understand that the conversations you have with people are probably the most important conversation they will have today, this week, this month, or even this year. And you need to honour every one of those conversations. So before you begin the next one, you need to think about that." And I think she told me to straighten my tie or something like that as well too. And that's really left a moment on me in that respect, because a lot of what we write about and a lot of what we learn about through the work of character education and what we're trying to pass on through the Sydney Character Initiative at the University of Sydney is that understanding about building a relationship over time. But we need to remember that time is made up of moments that are connected to each other. And every one of those moments has the capacity to be a moment where, again, I'll quote Leonard Cohen from the anthem, where you can shine a light into the cracks of somebody's flaws and brokenness. And you have to remember, this isn't you doing it because there's something inherently special about you. You're just Johnny on the spot. You're there in a moment. I'll give you another example. A guy called Jeff Richards. He was head of PE at the high school that I went to. I was out in the yard in year 8, or second form as they would have called it in those days, and I was having a real moment. I was in tears about something, and suddenly I felt this arm go around me, and this bloke started talking to me, and he just listened, and I poured it all out, and it was that thing of, that'll be all right. You're going to be okay. Everything will be all right. Because I'd got to the point where the thing that upset me was less worrying now than the fact that I burst into tears and I was going to get hammered for it by my mates and people who weren't my mates. He, of course, I didn't know him from a bar of soap. He'd just been picked to play for New South Wales in the rugby as the fullback, and then he played for Australia that year as well too, and he kicked a goal from about 63 metres out at the SCG against, I think it was the English or the Welsh or something like that, and that began my life. So I went to watch him do that because he'd done that thing for me. There's a powerful reciprocity in the gifts that we give to each other. But I have to tell you, that's the only significant encounter I ever had with him. But, I can then tell you about another teacher I had, David Thomas, who started teaching me in 1982, and still today he's teaching me, and we're connected with each other, and we learn from each other, we write from each other. He's the reason why I became a history teacher. So some of that character formation happens in long-term relationships, and other times it's just the moments which allow us that little reflective bit that says, do you know what, I can do this. I can take, and on the Game Changers podcast, we call it taking the big step forward and up. And sometimes somebody just needs to be there in the moment to convince us, and to show us the way, and to shine their light into our brokenness.
And it's such the gravity of the moment for your teacher would have been quite small, I imagine. But the gravity on it for
I,
you is,
I-
is
that's it. I
immense.
can't imagine that he would even have remembered, a week later that he'd done that, because he was just that sort of bloke. It's just a love, really. PE teachers in those days were a pretty brutal lot, and he wasn't. He was a big, gentle, kind, skillful person who just wanted to help other people become physically skillful.
When I was in year 8, which, did you say second form? Was that what we would call it in the UK?
Well, it's the second. This was in Sydney, but
Okay.
this was a school that was more English than the English, so it's they affected all of this sort of stuff. But let's just call it year 8 now, because we don't live in that world anymore.
Well, when I was in year 8, a PE teacher came up to me and he said to me, "Murph, I saw you got 50 on the weekend." And so it's a nothing comment, right? I was playing cricket on the weekend, but the school I was at, you weren't allowed to play for your club. You had to play for school.
Yep.
And I chose to take a detention each week because I would maintain playing for my local club when I moved to that high school.
Yep.
And so he took the time to read the local newspaper from the Adelaide Hills, saw that it was me, then came to me to, it's a nothing moment. It would have taken him 5 minutes to do. But I still remember what Bill said to me. That was 25 years ago. And
What's he do?
not only do I
do?
remember it, I read the paper when I used to teach in the Adelaide Hills. I read the Courier because I wanted to see how many kicks my boys got, how many goals the girls got at netball. And so every student that I teach now is being taught in some way by Bill. And that's how I see that kind of legacy piece going on, is that I think he's retired now, a legend, but his legend lives on even though it's no longer named.
And I think that's in the letter when I wrote the sort of line. I trust they will have passed on to you as much as was needed to live well and do deeds both worthwhile and noble. That's it. And it's what we have to remember is that we are capable of doing deeds both worthwhile and noble. And if we approach that with both a sense of assurance, but also a little bit of sheepishness about doing that sort of thing as well too. We do this because we remember that somebody did that for us and showed us the way forward. John C. Maxwell says, leaders know the way, go the way, and show the way. If we're showing the way forward, then we can believe that we can do that thing, and we can smile about it too, because it's a great thing. I'm really glad that you do that. That's a cracking thing to do, because you know how that made you feel and how you grew as a result, and how you recognize that someone cared for you. Well, you just pass that on now. And here's hoping they do that. And then here's hoping that has like a force multiplier effect all the way through.
And it's a moment, right? It's a moment that does it. It's a mark.
That's it.
It's a moment that becomes a mark, I think, would be the way I'd connect it to the words that you've used. You've introduced us to some beautiful characters, and fortunate enough to sort of be introduced to Stardust in this case, but then characters as well. I'd love for you to just talk us through the combination or the alignment, the difference between characters and character.
So, character comes from the Greek and it literally means to chip a mark in something. So the character of something, right from its sort of earliest etymology, there is this idea that a person will leave their mark on you. We use a phrase, don't we? Someone's a bit of a character, to talk about their idiosyncrasy, to talk about the particular chips in the otherwise smooth surface of their personalities that make them stand out for us. When we go into relationship with somebody, we take that first level of idiosyncrasy and we start investing it with more meaning, until eventually we get to say, we go from, she's a bit of a character, to she has character, to she has good character. And when we make that journey ourselves into the life of another human being and into the lives of those around us, then we can engage and begin that Ubuntu-like interdependence and reciprocity that we have, the giving of gifts to each other, I think. Within our profession, Associate Professor Wayne Cotton, a colleague of mine here at the University of Sydney, and an all-round good guy, he's just done a whole study with, I think, 9 other academics from around the world, which have shone a light on good teachers, not good teaching, which, talks about 10 character traits of really good teachers, reliability and consistency and enthusiasm and so on and so on and so on. And there is a whole school of thinking about teaching which rejects that completely. There's a whole school that says that teaching is a technical thing. If only you can master the sequence of the presentation of knowledge in a classroom and do it in 27 different ways and find, put this number next to the other and that. I get it with the science of learning stuff. I get it with it's not about relationship. It's about the technical performance of a function, and it's about getting knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. But, I was listening to Professor Tim Allender, who's the professor who teaches history education here at the university last night. I was at the Chow Chak Museum listening to him and another colleague talk about the future of history education, because, I started as a history teacher. Every now and then I permit myself to go back and sit up the back of a room and listen to people talk about these things. And, as Tim and Jonathan Dallymore, who's the professional officer for the History Teachers Association, were talking about it, they landed on this notion of the relationship in the classroom. And I think that's really, really important. I think, and it's at the heart of character education, because character education says that the who is more important than the what. The what is important. We need knowledge. We need skills. We need dispositions. We need habit. We need stuff. To take your example from earlier, to be able to go out and score a 50 on a Saturday as a little boy, or as a medium-sized boy, or as a big boy, it takes knowledge of the game. It takes skill. It takes many hours of practice, which speaks to disposition. It takes habit forming. It takes self-sacrifice, delayed self-gratification, resilience, robustness, the development of a certain sort of graveyard humour about what happens when, you deal with the injustice of the greatest game of all of those sorts of things. But fundamentally, it takes a relationship between yourself and those around you and the game and the coach and so on. And you can play a whole lot of cricket and you'll get absolutely nowhere with it, but then you get a teacher who notices you and then leaves that mark. So it's funny, we go from character to character in depth, but then we come back to character again and we sort of cycle around it again and again. I hope that's helpful.
The image that I had in my mind from the moment you said you leave a mark, that's where a mark in stone, you said. It got me thinking about whether 2 smooth stones can make a mark on each other. And if you get 2 perfectly round, smooth stones and sort of rub them against each other, do either of them change? But if you get 2 rough with little edges taken off and rub them against each other, both stones change. And so this idea that, characters are those marks in stone, but also that when you experience someone else's character, it does impact yours. It leaves a mark on yours, which then connects to this idea of science of learning that you're speaking of. Is if we smooth that process so much, do we lose our ability to make true marks? So those were the things that I was thinking about as you were sort of speaking.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way of thinking about it. Like, I think I've never heard anybody talk about it like that before. So my immediate instinct is to go, I really, really like what you're saying. I think one of the challenges of the science of learning stuff is that it's really useful. Like, if you understand the emerging sciences that have something to do with learning, you become a better teacher. But if you imagine that it makes you an all-powerful teacher who has the capacity to do one size fits all and fix the brokenness of people, like I think that's a folly. And then if you impose it on the profession in the way that I'm seeing it being done at the moment, not only will we lose the character of individuals, and not only will we lose the reality that the who is more important than the what, and the forming of character is more important. And And we'll lose sight of the fact that the formation of character is never perfect. We always oscillate between what's inside us needing to come out and the expectations of others. We're always wrestling. It's like in the book of Genesis, Jacob wrestling with the angel. We're always wrestling. We can't reach the end of it. And that's our humanity. Our humanity is that we're not going to be perfect. We'll do the best that we can. And I think you're right. We need to acknowledge that all of us have got sharp edges to us. And we need to be willing that will impact on, willing to acknowledge that will impact on others. I mean, we've talked about examples here of where we think character has been built well. We do it the other way too, don't we? I'm sure that there's plenty of students I taught over the years and plenty of teachers that I worked with who my rough edges left a negative mark on the formation of their character, and they probably wouldn't have much good to say about me. So, I think it flows both ways.
So I think if the science of learning is going to be, well, it can liberate us to show that character, but it shouldn't be used to the point of squashing character. And it reminds me of a line that, I heard it from Jay Leno of all people, but he said the automobile liberated the horse, because as soon as we can drive, it allowed horses to become things of leisure and fun and enjoyment. And so often teaching the intensification of the role, we actually don't always get an opportunity to demonstrate character because of the stress, the tiredness, the burden. So if it can play a role in liberating character, I think it will leave a beautiful mark. If it diminishes character, then the opposite.
It's lovely. It's lovely. Michael, it's a really beautiful way of putting it. I couldn't agree with you more. I just think it's important to note that there's a lot of folk out there who are advocating for the way as being a sort of a technical adherence to what they perceive as a set of truths about how we should teach and how learning occurs. They end up focusing on trying to make the teaching perfect, but that they forget that the learner will never be perfect, and that what we're trying to do here is form somebody who, in their imperfection, can thrive in the world. I like what you're saying. I think this is a good conversation. You're engaged. You engage so deeply with this and so thoughtfully. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I have listened to your letter a not insignificant number of times to think it through. And one of the things I'm also considering about you and your role is, this professorial position at a prestigious university, and what feels a little bit, it definitely feels more contemporary, forward-looking, potentially a little bit dirtier, not in a negative sense, but an edgier kind of piece with Game Changers and School for Tomorrow and the character initiative and things like this. How do you see yourself interacting within those different spaces? Do you kind of pendulum between them? Are you a conduit between them? Are you doing that clasping hand? How do you see yourself?
At the moment, I'm like the duck on a surface of water, paddling madly underneath, trying to work out what it all means. I'm very grateful that the university made an unorthodox choice to allow somebody like me the capacity to take the experience of an outsider, as I have been for the last 15 years. The work with Circle Education and the School for Tomorrow and Game Changers has to be the observer from outside, looking into the profession and commenting and trying to point out what fresh eyes from outside can see. What inside eyes are often, it's hard to see the things that you want to see because you live it every day. So I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity to what I'm do. I should name it. I am the Hooke Family Professor of Practice at in the Sydney School of Education and Social Work at the University of Sydney, and I'm very grateful to the Hooke family for providing the philanthropy for myself. My two colleagues, Eddie Wu and Scott Sleep, are amazing teachers. Eddie, is a brilliant maths teacher. Scott is all things STEM. and then they've picked me in this sort of educational leadership role. And so if I'm not a conventional choice and I was chosen because I wasn't a conventional choice, then how I do this job of trying to weave these, let's talk weaving for a moment. That might be a good analogy, to try and weave these things together. Perhaps I need to take your advice, Michael, and not make sure it's not woven together too smoothly. Because if it is too seamless, we'll lose the character of all of these pieces. The job of the Game Changers podcast, since we started up 5 years ago, has been to shine a light on bold pioneers who don't ask for permission and almost always get in trouble for it along the way. That's what happens to people with a prophetic voice. People with a prophetic voice end up with their heads on a platter in front of the king and the queen. It's. I used to teach Soviet history, and it's sort of, well, I would often say to kids that when the revolution comes, the best people end up against the wall being shot, and the worst people end up in power. So that's part of the way of the world, I think, around that. And many of the best people who advance us in education lose their own standing in the end because there are too many Vygotsky stretches away from the median of the profession. But we have to keep working towards it, don't we? We can't imagine that educational leadership is simply replication of what is. We've got to find people who have the space, who have the time, who can reflect on what is, who can remove themselves from that ridiculous busyness that we're all prey to in schools, and to say, there is a better way of doing things. So I'm not a revolutionary, as you might have just guessed from the analogies that I just gave. I do believe in prudent incrementalism. I think that's the way the profession makes it work. But we need to remember, the first 30 years of my teaching career, I spent with the old guard saying you couldn't possibly do technology in education. It was too hard and this and that and the other. COVID came along and we did it in a week, and some schools did it in a day. So I don't buy the line that we can't do things, or that we're too tired, or we're too stressed, or we're too this or that or the other. I think at the end of the day that within our profession there is a norm which is very powerful, which is very reassuring to us. And when we challenge that norm, it offends our sense of where we are, and we respond to it occasionally quite vituperously around that. I can give you an example. In my late 20s, I was asked to write the extension history syllabus with a colleague, Anne McCallum, for the state of New South Wales after the McGaw report. 26 years later, they're still using the same syllabus. We wrote that syllabus in 72 hours. We handed in the other syllabuses we were working on the Wednesday afternoon, and Libby Hegarty, God bless her, who was the inspector of history at that point in time, she said, there's another syllabus, the Premier Bodcars just authorised it. He wants it on his desk on Friday afternoon. And so Anne and I went away and wrote a syllabus that introduced historiography and historical thinking into the parlance of that. Why? Because the only brief we were given, just write a syllabus that you would want to teach that's different from anything else. So there we were, Johnny on the spot, we did it. Now, I can remember going around the state in 99, 2000, 2001, doing professional development conversations with staff, history teachers all over the state, and being called every name under the sun, because we were the authors of this fundamental change that was going to take away the glorious three ancient and modern history syllabuses. 26 years later, you listen to those same people talking, and it's a thing that is just, they love dearly. So I think our profession doesn't respond well to change. I think in my role, if I can continue to weave things together between the parts and remind people that we have to keep pushing forward, that we have to look for the ways that we can make progress and we can change things. And I can do that with a bit of a smile on occasion, because it's helpful being a big bloke with a beard. You can sort of have a bit of a laugh and carry people along, but also celebrate the great work that's being done. Because I actually think the answers to the change that's required are already being done in schools. We just need to find the people who are doing it and then protect them and shine a light on their work. We need their light to shine.
You started by referring to your appointment as an unorthodox one. And as soon as you said that, I thought, It sounds like a brave one rather than an unorthodox, and owning kind of bravery rather than, well, this is a bit weird. It's like, no, this is a brave choice. And again, the liberation that then gives you. A colleague of mine at the last school I worked at, he came up to me one day and said, Michael, I just don't know how you do it. You keep saying no to some of the big things that get pushed down. Don't you worry about getting in trouble for that? And I said, absolutely not. They knew who I was when they hired me. The reason I got the job was because of who I am, not because of who they want me to be. And in the case of, they've appointed Phil to be this professor of education. They're not looking for you to change and be more like someone else. You're there. The brave choice is to put you there because they want to disrupt it and have it in that form.
Well, I think it's anybody you give me a job of that nature, I think it's very brave on their part, and I'm very hopeful. I really hope that I can honour the choice that they've made in me. I mean, let me tell you practically some of the things that we want to do. I want to keep the Game Changers podcast going because that seems to be a thing, but I want to see how we can use the resources of the university and the connections that we've got around that to push that forward in lots and lots of interesting ways and to play with formats. I'm quite inspired by the way you play with formats as well too. So it's sort of, we've got a set format, but it's about time that we started breaking that mold a little bit and exploring a little bit around that. As I said earlier, we're going to set up the Sydney Character Initiative. There are some really great centres of study around the world in education for character. The University of Birmingham has its Jubilee Centre for Civic Virtue. There's the Oxford Character Project. There's the Harvard Human Flourishing Program. Wake Forest has got its own program for character and leadership. It's about time we had one of those that spoke with an Australian accent that can stand alongside those. So that's what we're doing. And working with school-based associations like the Australian Character Education Alliance and so on, and really it ties together a lot of work. You've got Sandra Milligan at Melbourne Metrics and Jim Tognolini at the Centre for Educational Measurement of Assessment. They're doing the measurement piece already, and then you've got the guys at SACE and at Learning Creates Australia who are trying to do the learner profile piece, and you've got people like Nicole Dyson at Future Anything, really, really pushing forward on competencies. Jeanette Shear at HEX. I mean, you've got amazing people doing things in this country. We need to weave all of that together. So that's what we want to do. We want to be running programs. We want to be supporting and running research ourselves. I don't see us at this stage as running university degrees per se. I think we'd rather influence what other people are doing in their degrees. And once you become a faculty, you lose your edge. So you lose your capacity to be a little bit cheeky and irritating as well too. So I want us to retain that. We're going to be doing some work around as well as the research into character. So what is character? What is good character? And then the second question, how should we teach for good character? And then the third one is how do we lead for and with good character? And we really want to we're inspired by some of the work taking place, particularly in the American universities. But this goes back, goes back through history, the notion of a retreat. How do you take people on a retreat and give them the space to reflect on who they are? And it's at that point we want to see the intersection of tertiary and secondary and primary education, but also industry, not-for-profits, business, community, and so on. We think there's a role to play in that. I mean, there's great work being done by places like Cranlana down at the University of Melbourne, but they're focused more on civil service. Harvard's doing some great work, and the Centre for Creative Leadership. As I said, there's such an exciting opportunity to learn from what folk are doing. It's a great program at the Smith School for the environment at Oxford University, and Dr. Lawrence Wainwright's doing some great work there. And I've had an opportunity for a couple of years to join in a little bit about that too. The lovely notion of forming a group, a cohort, a relatively small cohort, to enable them to go out into the world and do the work of sustainability. So we want to learn from those things, but then we want to put it into play to complement what's already being done. We want to find a way to help leaders in Australian and South Pacific and Southeast Asian and other schools around the world to get that space to think. Plus, there's also some work I want to do around boys' education because, we blokes, we don't get a good rap in the world at the moment, and there's lots of good reasons for that. But I think it's also, I think it's also become a really harmful trope. I talked about binary thinking earlier. My erstwhile colleague Adriano De Prado was very big on that, the notion of sort of binaries, false binaries, and so we have this idea that if men are not good, they must be bad, and so therefore we're growing generations of young men who grow up believing that they're bad. And our research shows that. Our research shows that boys are really interested in the idea of character. They want to be good men, but they think there's something wrong with them. The world, everybody tells them there's something wrong with them, and then they equate that with moral failing. So, if you're 15 and you're wrestling with all of that, no wonder if some idiot on the internet says he has the answer and that answer's a wrong answer. It's seductive, isn't it? So what we're interested in doing is seeing, can we build a positive model for educating boys that draws on the sort of work that, Dr. Ray Swan down at Masculinity, the Positive Masculinity Institute at Tassa Brighton Grammar School, doing world-leading stuff on thinking about positive ways for young men to interact with the world. We need to be thinking about teaching that. So that's the book project I'm working on at the moment with a colleague of mine, David Atkinson, who's head teacher at Dr. Challoner's Grammar School in the UK. So, there's lots of stuff to do, Michael, and the beauty is that they asked me what I wanted to do, and I told them, and they went, "Oh yeah, go for it." So we're going for it.
I love that you're going for it.
Yeah, plus all the work that we're doing at Circle Education and School for Tomorrow continues as well. Because again, that's the nature of these roles, particularly professors of practice roles, is that you don't have to stop what you're doing. You blend and you merge all your different things. And as I said, you go for it. You just go hard. Life's short. It's an adventure. There's mountains to climb. Let's go and do it.
I'm super excited to see what you weave and to be a part of what you weave, because that's also what happens, right? So just by listening and discussing today, I'm a thread in there in some way, shape, or form, and it's a beautiful thing to think that's what happens. So super excited to see what's weaved. I get the feeling it's not going to be the finest silk scarf. It's going to have some edges, and that they are going to be a big part of the beauty.
Oh yeah, possibly. I mean, look, I think systems take rough and make them smooth, and I'm not a system. So, and the work that we do is not the work of a system. But I think what we can do is we can help people take a big step forward and up, and then they can work out how to weave things into beautiful silk scarves. Because the problem is, if we were to do it, or anybody in this position was to imagine that they have the answer, then you commit the flaw, I think, that I mentioned earlier in what I'm seeing with the really useful work of the science of learning, is that it's being presented as one scarf fits all. And we need many beautiful, finely woven, gorgeous scarves.
Phil, thank you so much for weaving the first of our Dear Stardust scarves and the first thread in what I hope will be a gorgeous thing. And thank you so much for leaving your gorgeous mark with your letter.
Oh, Michael, thank you so much. And thank you for this incredible project you're doing. It's such a wonderful way for us to get out of our norm and shake ourselves off. I read, when your email came, I read it to start with, and what is this? And then I went back and read it again and again. I said, this is brilliant. This is just, nobody's ever asked me something like this before, and that's what we need. We need this sort of thinking. So I'm very chuffed to be part of your project. And I wish you all the very best as you weave us all together.
That's very generous. Thank you.